2.
Good evening to our listening audience. We want to welcome the Honorable John Barritt to our virtual chat for this Sunday evening. As you know, we provide these, or we provide these chats to everyone to allow us to remain in contact with the constituency. And the nature of what we do depends upon questions that they have asked, or it ends up whereby there's things that are in the community that people want to know about. And so I try to get the information and be as factual as possible once we get started. And so, Mr. Barritt, you know, obviously we just came off a PLP election, and there were several historic aspects to that. And we have talked to others about that so far. But you know, and we all know that you played a crucial role in number 9 with the now Honorable Vance Campbell. And so we wanted to reach out to you, and also we know that you have been a political commentator for a very long period of time, and you've just been a voice in the community that we've come to rely on to provide a lot of factual, objective information. And so welcome to you for this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. It's good to be here, and I'm very grateful for your kind remarks. If I may say, while I helped Vance, I'm not so sure I was as crucial as he was, and I was happy to support him. But for someone who was trying for his 3rd time, I think he'd shown commitment and dedication to the constituents in Smiths there, and I think that was probably the crucial factor in his win.
Sure, and we'll get to that as we talk some more this evening. But let's go back a bit and talk about you, Mr. Barritt, first of all, in terms of your background, your education, and there were, as we talked earlier, there were 1 or 2 surprises that I saw when you gave me your resume. But we'll get to that. But just give the general public a review of your background and things that they may not know that brought you to politics and your general legal career.
Anthony, that's a long journey. I probably need you to point me to specifically where you'd like me to go. But in terms of my life, I grew up in the Langton Hill area in Pembroke, near the Ducking Stool, right behind what was then the Langton Trading Company, or that's now known as the Seamart.
Sure.
And that was my area in which I grew up. And I went to Saltus Grammar School over the hill. Walked to school every day.
Sure.
And
just pause 1 quick second. We'll do our technical.
We got a microphone problem.
Yes, any problem? Angela. Okay. So keep going. Actually, just take my mic.
All right, and so I went to Saltus Grammar School and did up until probably just after middle school into senior school. And I found school, certainly Saltus Grammar School, very, I wouldn't, challenging is one word, not academically, but I was not performing well. I was having behavioral problems. I only tackled those subjects where I liked teachers, did reasonably well in them. And I love my sports. And in sports, I used to often ask, because when we moved to Devonshire, I lived near Devonshire Bay, when I played football with kids in the area from over the hill, including black kids, and I used to say and wonder, well, how can you call Saltus Grammar School school champions when we haven't played Barclay? And I used to find that very, very challenging in terms of how can you be rated number 1 in the island. But in any event, as I say, I was having these behavioral problems, I would call them, where I was basically becoming a rebel. I'll be quite honest with you. And the best thing for me is probably I made this decision for me to go away to school. And I wanted to go to the school that my sister was.
What age was this?
14. And luckily my father was able to make that possible, and it turned my life around really, because when I found myself left alone at boarding school in Canada at age 14, I wondered what the heck I had done to myself. But I managed to cope and weather, because I wasn't the first one there. There were other Bermudians there. In fact, I'm pleased to say that the school I went to, Albert College in Belleville, Ontario, has been a school of choice for many Bermudians, including many black Bermudians. And there were a number of us up there at the time, and we developed a soccer program And if you know Bermudians, and you do,
Yeah.
when we're away in school, we're like fish in a tank. We all flock together in that corner, and we're very proud of our home. And that was a terrific experience for me. And then I went on from there to university, and I developed some of my political interest at school up there. I was always, in my family, particularly my family background and it's my family's involvement in Bermuda, I was aware politically of things going on in Bermuda, and probably the Great Awakening was the Belleville riots back then and what was behind all of them. And so my political interests were developing in Canada. I found avenues for them in terms of doing, especially when I moved up the road to a university, a brand new one called Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario, which was a hotbed at that time for, I suppose we could say socialist, the New Democratic Party. And I got involved there, and one of my friends, in fact, went on to become an MPP in Ontario for the New Democratic Party, and in the cabinet there for a period of time. And that all developed my interest in politics. In the meantime, when I was coming back in the summers, I always liked writing and had been challenged by the editors of the Royal Gazette when I was 14 years old. Instead of complaining about our coverage, why don't you do something about it? I said, well, how do I do something about it? He invited me to start writing about what young Bermudians were thinking. And interestingly enough, that's how I first hooked up with Arthur Hudson, because Arthur was having meetings up and down the island about the way in which Bermuda was developing. And I started attending some of those meetings with young people and reporting on what they were saying. And I got quite taken with the fact that what I wrote was appearing in the newspaper, and what I was writing was out of the ordinary for what one would expect in the Royal Gazette. And I continued with that. And as I continued in journalism, which I really enjoyed, and I thought I was very good at as well, that my interest in politics continued and developed, but this time as an outsider, as a reporter, as opposed to a participant, which I had not up to that point been. And I really enjoyed it when I moved from the Gazette. Now I'm in my early 20s. I'd gone to university and got a journalism degree, and was, as I say, working in newspapers, came back to the Gazette, got an opportunity to move to the Bermuda Sun newspaper, which I think some of your viewers will remember. As a weekly newspaper, and at that time it was regarded as something of an alternative voice.
Yes, I made that myself.
It had a different outlook and gave expression to different views than one would find in the Gazette. And they also did it under bylines. And suddenly I embraced that freedom to report and tried to develop new contacts.
And just what do you mean by bylines?
That is where they would credit the story and say by John Barritt. And so that people would, and I thought that was the right thing to do, particularly when you start to get into matters of opinion. And I think it's appropriate that people be given credit as well. And so I started to report and go into places and to voices that weren't normally represented in the Gazette, or voices from people who didn't trust the Gazette. And that led me to develop my relationship with the former leader of this party, Dame Lois Brown Evans. And I remember when she was leader then, convincing her that, oh, please allow me to interview you and do a piece on you and your family as the person. I'm not into doing got you politics or to find you or get you to say something that we can make a big headline. I actually want to report so people of Bermuda would get to know you. And it took time to develop that trust, because at that time my father was a member of the UBP government. And similarly with respect to the union and reporting on union matters. I mean, these were important institutions in Bermuda which were going unreported. People didn't know what they thought, and it was important that people do know what they think in the community. And so I also tried to develop a relationship with the union through Ottawell Simmons, who was then the president. And that wasn't easy, because there was a distrust of newspapers. It was almost as if you're trying to expose me in a negative light. And sometimes what was reported wouldn't always be positive, but if you were accurate and you did the good as well and treated people fairly, I developed those relationships which led to, I think, better reporting, both on a social, economic, and a political front. And I really started to enjoy that.
It's interesting. So, at what stage did you decide that it was journalism? Because you said you had you called it behavioral problems at school. But so when you first went overseas, did you think, okay, I'm going to do journalism, or what got you to start that in a formal sense?
Only when I ended up writing a letter to the editor complaining about their coverage as a youngster. And as I say, the editor of the newspaper challenged me and offered me an opportunity to write stuff for the newspaper and get paid for it.
Okay, at that stage, you were already in boarding school or you were at university?
No, yes, I think so. Probably about 15, 16 years old.
Amazing, okay. And then you went on to greater strength, as you say, because, so.
I kept at it. I mean, and I went from part-time to full-time when I finished university, when sadly, but it's the way it unfolded, a reporter was murdered who worked on the newspaper. And they said, yes, and they said to me, John, if you work full-time, we'll pay you. I think back then it was $170 a week. And that was a lot of money back then to me. And I said, okay, I'm going to give this a full-time go. And that's how I ended up working at the Gazette on a full-time basis.
And then, so you separated as a youngster, you were informed based upon your own circumstances, you had some black friends playing football and the rest of it. By the way, as I said to you earlier also in your bio, I didn't realize you had played a social club, which is just around the corner from here. And in its day, certainly an iconic football club. You know, it did have a huge role to play in the social and academic development of many young people. So that was great.
And back in the day, as I say, I had a love of sport. My number one sport was soccer, followed closely by cricket. And I preferred soccer because it was played in the winter, and cricket was in the summer. And I preferred the cooler weather to the hotter weather. And my team back then was Young Men's Social Club. I used to go around to the box and other places to see them play. And my favorite player was a fellow by the name of Gladwin Bubba Daniels. And he was a center back, and I thought, this is the leader, this is the man that controls the game. Yeah. That's what I want to be when I play. Okay. I want to follow that model. And when I came back from university, and I wanted to play what was then First Division soccer. It wasn't Premier, it was called First Division. I said, I'd like to try out for social club. I mean, I really wanted to play at the top flight, and I thought that they were one of the better clubs, and they were. For sure. And it just so happened that I knew the coach of the team really well, Alfie Eve. And Alfie said, John, come around, man, try out. Sure, you'll have an opportunity. And I came around and I trained hard because I really wanted to play, and I managed to make the team. And oddly enough, I wasn't the only white person either playing back then. There were 5 of us. And for me, it was by coincidence that 5 of us showed up to play for Social Club. There was Harold Medeiros, who played goal, a fellow who was a lawyer at Applebee's at the time, Phil Aspen, I believe his name was, Dave Walton, who was a teacher, and Graham Otterbridge, who showed up then as well to play. And I remember the first time I love to tell this story, the first time we turned out that season at Southampton Rangers Club. And if you know the oval there, the sound really carries. And this fella came out from inside and he said, who's playing today? And someone said, it's Rangers and Social Club. Social Club? What social club is that? Because all 5 white guys were on the dressed for the game. I don't know if we all played, but we were all dressed, and it was quite a. I think at the time, we're talking 1970, 71.
Okay. And so then let's talk more in terms of your political development, because what's interesting to me right now is that you said you actually thought was part of the UBP, which is that's understandable. But what caused you to necessarily turn up for the UBP as opposed to the PLP or otherwise, given your association with Arthur Hudson and Dame Brown Evans, Honorable Simmons, and those type of people?
Dave Lewis told me it's because I went conservative after I went back to law school and came back, and I got the opportunity to work for Appleby, Sperling, and Kemp, which were one of the big 2 law firms at the time. And there is a grain of truth in what Dave Lewis said. But I think for me, the opportunity arose to run in Devonshire South. Not immediately after my father retired, but I think one term after that. And people had approached me about running and down there, and I thought, all right, I'd like to serve. There's an opportunity here in this district particularly because I've grown up in it,
Yes.
people know me, and I'll have a go. And there was a primary. Back in the day,
Yeah.
it seems like yesterday to me, but in any event, back then, and now we're talking the early 90s,
Yes.
primaries were still a thing in the United Bermuda Party, particularly in the seats that were regarded as safe.
Yes.
And at that time, I was the person who challenged as well was Giorgio Zano
Yes.
in Devonshire South. And I remember that between us, we signed up close to 1,000 people to vote in that primary, and it had to be held. I think the poll was taken at Saltus Cavendish Day.
Yes, I remember, yeah.
I think that was the place, and we had over 800, close to 900 people show up for a primary.
Yeah.
And it's understandable in one way because people figured, well, whoever wins this primary is going to win in the general election. And it's quite amazing to me that we had that number. But mind you, back then, Devonshire South had registered constituents, dual seat
But also it was
constituents.
different, wasn't it?
About 2,500 registered
Yeah.
voters.
Yeah.
So it's quite different than what it is today. And in fact, when we moved from dual seats to single seats, I used to tell some of my colleagues, especially those who hadn't had dual seats, that this 1,000 is a breeze.
It's easy.
Is a breeze compared to 2,500. And so that's how I think I ended up in running for the UBP and in Devonshire South.
And I don't think everyone's aware of the transition for you from journalism into law. And you said just now that you became more conservative. Tell us about that transition.
I'd always, in the back of my mind, wanted to do law. And I have to tell you, Anthony, and certainly a lot of people relate to this, journalism in Bermuda does not pay.
Yes, that's right.
Extremely well. And I had 2 small children at this point. And I was encouraged by a number of people to go, to try to read law, as they say. 2 of them who were really instrumental, one was Jeff Bell, who's now a justice on the Court of Appeal. As a reporter, I used to go into courts and report on court cases. And Jeff Bell was one who would appear, and I'd talk to him regularly, and he used to say, "John, you ought to give it a try. You know, at least make the effort."
Yeah.
And the other person who told me that he thought I was a suitable candidate, and if I had an interest in politics, and I know you have an interest in politics, you'd be better off having law as a base than journalism. And that was the husband of Dave Lowe's Brown Evans, John Evans. I'd gotten into the family really well, and I remember we were on one of those gratis cruises that they sometimes give me as a journalism. He with his wife and we spent an evening talking, and I said, okay, I'll give it a go. I'll give it a try. And to do that in Canada, because Canada is going to be the place for me, because my wife is Canadian. Her sister happened to live near Calgary, Alberta, where there was a university. I looked at the university. It was brand new. They seemed to be taking and targeting mature students. And I sat the LSAT up at Bermuda College or Roberts Avenue on a Saturday morning, wondering what the heck I'm doing. But I did the exam, made the application, and got accepted. And then I said, all right, I'm going to take the chance. Cashed in what chips I had, and went up there. Luckily, the Canadian dollar is, you get back then 25 cents extra. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you that the legal education then in Alberta, because it was oil rich, the university was subsidized, I don't think it was more than $15,000 the tuition. And maybe that's Canadian too. And so it was a great opportunity that I took, my wife being Canadian as well helped. And took the chance.
And before we move off your personal information, let's say, did you say that you were not necessarily a good student?
That's correct.
And how did you, because I think it's important, we interviewed a few other people, and a lot of times when we see people from the public perspective, we just assume everything went smoothly. So how did you overcome those, if we call them challenges, both personally and like, how did you do it? And what advice would you give to those that may be listening to this?
I give this advice all the time. The best thing you can do is get off the rock. To get into another country, into another situation where you're free from some of the constraints and expectations that start to define you here in Bermuda. They can be very limiting and very debilitating. And I think for me, the turnaround came when, as I said, when I got that opportunity to attend Albert College, a co-ed institution, a different philosophy, a different approach than in Bermuda, and I'm talking private school here now, not public. And I had excellent teachers there. I will confess I was a bit shocked, and now I'm on my own, and the fear of failure is a big driver of success. And I took it on, and I found out that I could achieve. And I like to say, by the time I got to my third and final year there, I was running the place.
And so one last question about that. The expectation, was it from your father or from your family that they expected you to excel?
No, it's
compared to your brothers, or how was it?
No. I would say my parents always supported. What I meant was what you think your peers want you to do, what it is that will make you cool or cooler than the next person.
Okay.
And in Bermuda, you can easily get off track. And I mean, when I look back now, I could see how close I was to going off track, thinking it was a great thing to do, frankly, illegal. Yeah. I mean, back then it was bikes.
Yeah.
And I had a friend, and sadly he's passed, but I told this story in the eulogy at his funeral. Back then, when we were 15, a lot of our peers, we were riding mobilettes, which were the bike of the day back then, at night, and the police would try and catch you. And my friend said, John, forget that, man. Let's drive a car. The police will not be looking for kids in the car. And he learned how to drive a car.
And so did you?
No. I didn't have as much courage as he did, I guess. But he drove to the car one night with me in the passenger seat, and I'm telling you, man, I don't know what time of year it was, but I was sweating bullets.
Okay. So that's now transition a bit into you, the politician. And you said earlier that you went to, I noted that you went to ASNK when you first started your law career in Bermuda. And then, if we're honest about that, I suppose you would have not been able to survive there if you tried to join the PLP, right?
I think, yes, that's probably a fair comment.
Right. Because we know, I'm young enough to get old enough to know that there were many stories in terms of for white Bermudans to join the PLP, they'll be ostracized in various contexts and they would not be able to do so. And so I'm assuming that would have been the same for yourself. And to be honest, even when it came to me in the accounting arena, you had to be but you were certainly discouraged from a public association with the PLP.
And I think it's fair to say that would have been in my mind as well. I mean, to be quite honest with you, knowing the way Bermuda was going at that time, no question about it. But with respect to ASNK, as we referred to it then, I had actually won a scholarship after my first year in ASNK. They give out law scholarships, more today, more law firms doing it than ever before, but managed to secure one. And I felt a kind of obligation to return to Appleby, particularly when they offered me a position. I could have stayed in Canada, in Calgary, Alberta, which was far too cold in the winter and dry for me. And I came back home and they offered me a place, and I felt that I really ought to do that, having had the benefit of one of their scholarships.
Actually, I did note that, as I read your resume, that you joined ASNK and within 4 years you became a partner.
Yep.
And was that based upon your personal accidents? Or I was surprised, and I know normally what happens is it takes a while for persons to, once they join a law firm, or an accounting firm for that matter, to actually get to the stage of being a partner. It takes a while.
Yes, I'd like to believe it with my personal excellence, because you're measured, if you know anything about law, by the billable hours that you put in, and then the hours you put in over that, and then how much you bill.
Right.
And that's usually one of the indices that are used in determining whether somebody ought to be admitted to partnership.
Okay.
And I put in the hours, I can tell you.
Now let's fast forward in terms of the pure politics of it all. So you initially went in, you were encouraged to become a member of the UBP. We talked just now that you ran against Mr. Zano in the primary to get the seat in Devonshire South. And to be honest, I still remember that part of it may not have been your intention, but I think the generic PR at that time was that Mr. Zano has a strong accent. And so therefore, some people started to use that as a reason why he should not be successful. And for me, going backwards now, I'm thinking that was one of those times whereby politics became negative, where I think now we tend not to be too personal. Although, sorry, we're going back to being personal, but there was a time when people were not personal. But at that stage, I remember it happening. So you joined the UBP, and then...
Anthony, I would say politics has always been personal in Bermuda. As far as I remember from reporting in that, there's nothing new in that. There are some of the personal whispering campaigns, and some of it's just right at it up front. I can tell you, I never made that a feature of my campaign with Giorgio, who's a good friend of mine today. I mean, I didn't do that. And in fact, I remember people calling me and saying, Mr. Barritt, you don't live in Devonshire. I said, no, right now I live in Pembroke. My home was in Devonshire. Well, I can't vote for you. And I said, well, I understand that. And if you feel that's the most important thing, then don't vote for me. So that too was, all these things developed back then anyhow, as part of a campaign. But no, I didn't make that a feature of my campaign. I can tell you that straight up.
And what can you tell us about your journey through the UBP? Because I'm going to get to, of course, the crux of tonight's comment in terms of you obviously council advance, but what can you share publicly about your journey, I want to call it, to the UBP?
Well, I was first elected in '93, which was the last United Bermuda Party government under Sir John Swan. And I would say that immediately upon election, I got a baptism by fire.
Okay.
I hadn't had that much experience to deal with what I think was thrown at me. And now I'm not talking about issues, community issues, I'm talking about internal politics. And this is often a feature of political parties, one of the ugly features, I think, besides the political parties. And the first thing was the election of speaker, where members of the UBP had approached the PLP and decided that together they would vote to put Ernest Acuto in the chair. And we'd had a vote in caucus, and I was away at the time, but it was 11-10 that David Dyer should be speaker and not Ernest Acuto. Very close vote. No one said anything, so on the day of the first day of Parliament, that was a big shock and a surprise. And at that time, I was the party whip, and I knew nothing about it. And that's was really personally embarrassing that happened. I understood it. I would have liked to just go, not nobody. Yes, exactly. I would like we'd either handled it or reconsidered it in view of what was done, but that wasn't the way it went. And I knew that, and then shortly I realized that this ran a lot deeper than just the vote for speaker.
Yeah.
Because the next issue we were confronted with was the issue of independence. When Sir John Swan decided, and not just Sir John Swan, but he and some of his colleagues decided that Bermuda should have an independence referendum. And that had not been an issue in the election campaign. And in fact, I know people would ask me when I went around knocking on doors, what's my position? And one of the first things I said, well, I understand you're asking, but please know it's not in the platform, it's not part of the campaign. There's no need to dwell on that, but I'm not in favor of it at this time. And here we were bringing it up, putting a referendum on people, and there was a great deal of pressure on me to go along with the program, but I didn't, and I wouldn't, because I felt that the people who put me here, when they'd ask that question, I'd tell them what my position was. So I felt I couldn't support it. And there were others in the party who felt the same way. And then there was this fracture and split. And the way we accommodated that was, it'll be a referendum, the party takes no position, puts out a paper on the options, and people will vote yes or no. And then Freddie Wade, the late Freddie Wade, as leader of the PLP, said no. We're not going to support this, a referendum. We're going to boycott the referendum. The UBP didn't run on independence. They didn't even run on having a referendum on independence.
And actually, we spoke with this internally, not internally, but just a few of us the other day. So what's your recollection as to why it did not succeed?
Well, because there was a clear majority. I think quite apart from what the Progressive Labor Party position was, I think there was a majority in the country, if you look at the polls, that said we're not interested in independence at this time. Bermuda can't afford it. That was an economic consideration. And when the PLP boycotted it, that just cemented the result.
And do you think that we made a mistake? Not necessarily at that time, but do you think that Bermuda should be independent now, or have you changed your perspective on that? Or maybe more politely, I guess, is what do you think we should be considering to make that step?
I think that, first of all, you've got to run on it. I think the position of the UK is, though, that there'll be a referendum. They want it to be the clear will of the people, and that is a process that I can support, no question about it. But before you just have a vote, you'd like to have some campaigning so people can see pros and cons of independence. My own personal position is I still think there's a lot more that we can do and that we ought to do to make ourselves a lot more independent than we currently are within the framework. And when I say a lot more independent than we are, I'd like to see a shift in how we tackle our community problems. We are at a crossroads now where I think the people of the country are looking for a new approach to solving our problems. And they don't like either the political or the racial divide that seems to prevent us from working together to solve, not to solve, but to tackle these problems.
That's going to be an interesting discussion point, but I want to fast a little bit in terms of making sure we do address your ultimate decision to canvass with the Honorable Vance Campbell. But obviously, OBA came out at some point as a party, and you tell us about your transition or your transition to the OBA.
Yeah, let me shorten what's a long story.
Okay.
I was personally tired of sitting on the opposition benches. It's a frustrating experience, Anthony. I know you've had that because you like to have some influence. You like to bring your thoughts and what you think the country should be doing. You'd like it to come to bear. But when you're in opposition, you're shut out. That's one of the things that I think ought to be changed in this country. And with some goodwill it can be, but I'll come to that in a minute. Because I've always been I think I'm on this path, and I have been since I started in politics. And in fact, it would be a nice segue as to why I worked for Vance Campbell in the last election. In any event, so I think, that's where we need to be going. And I've been intrigued by the throne speech recently, where the government has talked about constitutional change to make us more nimble and effective. I'd like to see some. I don't know if it requires constitutional change, but I'd like to see some of this change to not only make us more nimble, but more effective than we currently are.
Right. And so then let's real quickly go through the OBA.
Oh, you mentioned about the OBA.
You're part of the OBA.
Okay,
This is a general spiel I'll give you. You can
tired of being on the opposition benches.
Right.
And we've gone into a by-election where Dr. Ewart Brown has stepped down. Mark Bean was running for the PLP in his constituency. The OBA had a candidate. The UBP had a candidate. They finished. BDA had a candidate. They had a candidate. They finished third. We finished second. What's the point of finishing second or third or beating somebody else? The whole point is, if you want to bring your ideas to fruition, you've got to win the government.
Yes.
And it seemed to me at the time that what was separating the BDA from the UBP was not much in terms of ideology or philosophy. So we worked real hard behind the scenes because Paula Cox was now the premier leader and premier of the country. And we said the election's going to be called soon. We've got to move quickly if we're going to put these two groups together. And I worked hard for that. And it came to fruition. And when we decided to form this new party, I insisted, as did some others, that it had to be something different. The old way of doing things had to go.
Okay.
And what was the old way of doing things? Having whoever the elected MPs are, choose who the leader is. That's a very narrow base to start with if you're looking to open up your party. And so I said, this party's got to be open to whoever wants to join, and whoever wants to join gets to vote in an election for leader. And the leader doesn't have to be an elected MP. People said, well, hang on a second, hang on. I see you report. And we said, Well, he or she has to be a member of parliament to be the leader of the opposition. Somebody will have to resign. Well, that's the old story of, the chicken and the pig make a sacrifice. The chicken says, I'll lay an egg, you get the bacon.
Right.
And it's a hard decision to make. But I put up my hand and said, look, I'll do it. I believe the country deserves a better alternative than what we currently have.
Okay.
That is an alternative, as well as an alternative that appears to work, or is appealing to the current government. And so I said, when Craig Cannoneer ran and Bob Richards ran, and Craig Cannoneer won by a narrow majority, people came to me and said, John, you can't resign, including people of then the Bermuda Democratic Alliance. There'd be a mistake. And I said, I'm sorry. One thing about JB, he lives and dies by his word. I gave my word. I've got to step down. I will take Craig Cannoneer around in my constituency. You remember this?
You don't recall. That was the first time I ran.
Yeah,
2011.
I do remember, because I can pay you a compliment. And I think I told you this, and I remember some people saying, that Anthony Richardson's impressive. That's one of the best candidates that the rest of Labour ever put up in Devonshire South, because they used to write it off as a UBB stronghold.
Yes.
And I think I told you that. And anyways, I took Craig around, he got elected, and that was that. And then Paula Cox held off calling an election, gave the OB a chance to organize. And they managed to pull it off when the election was called. But at this stage, now I'm out. And when you're out, you're really out.
Right. But on that note, one question that came, I'm not sure if you answered publicly, but was there an expectation or disappointment that you were not appointed to the Senate once the OBA won?
There was an expectation on my part, because in our talks internally, we were trying to persuade other MPs to step down to allow new blood in. And we would say that, look, what we'll do is we'll put those people in the Senate, where we'll put some of our older, wiser heads, particularly should we win the government, and go that way. I didn't make any deals, though. That's another thing. I was not going to make a deal. I either commend myself to you, and you think I'm worth it, and you treat me accordingly, or you don't. Well, I wasn't treated accordingly. I didn't get invited to join the Senate or the cabinet.
Now, what's interesting in my mind, again, based upon some things I did not know, but now I think I do know, is how did you handle that personal disappointment? How did you manage, how did you work through that?
As best I could. As best I could. I mean, I've got family and friends who understood and felt the same way. In fact, some of them asked the leadership of the party, why haven't you invited John Barritt back into your cabinet, considering what he's done for you personally, as well as for the party, to make it happen? And the message that came back was, well, we can't have him. He'll make us look too UBP. And that's not you've heard that before.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is what it is.
I'm sure. And I thought, well, some of my progressive Labour Party friends said, well, gee, John, they picked the wrong person to make the poster boy for the UBP. And I said, thank you for that compliment. I think you're right. But
well, and so then, because I had some contact with you, and I read obviously what you were writing and whatever, and it was interesting to see the line to, because as far as I'm aware, you never publicly expressed any dissatisfaction or what you talked about tonight, for example, about an expectation to be in the Senate. And so I appreciated that. And then, of course, there was some interesting times, let's call it, politically. And then fast forward to 2020, right before that, what are your thoughts about the OBA's preparation for this election? And then I want you to just talk to us about your decision process by which you made that decision to work with.
Let me just say that when I wasn't invited back to join the government, one of the things I continued to do was to write my column, and that's something I enjoyed doing, and I kept going. And some people felt I was too critical of the government, of the OBA. But I think that's when you do a column, you want to be as critical as you can. Well, not as critical as you can, but the whole point is that I wasn't there to do puffery for the OBA. Let's put it that way. And so I kept it more in that way, and I wasn't that far away from politics.
Okay.
So I kept busy that way, and I just decided not to. I remember a fellow from Canada, believe it or not, who used to come to Bermuda, an MP, federal MP. He phoned me to congratulate me on the success that the OVA had. He said, and what you've done to make it happen. I said, well, thank you very much. I wish there were others who would appreciate that. But in any event, thank you. And I told him how I felt, and I thought that I'd been, that I'd been overlooked and should not have been. He said, look, John, one thing I can tell you is not everybody likes a loser, and similarly, they don't like, and a sore loser, and they don't like sore winners either.
Okay.
So put your head down and do what you can and go ahead. So that's basically what I did. And when now you asked me what I think of the OVA's preparation for this election.
Yeah.
The question I would say to you is, what preparation?
Okay.
And I think that's the way most people recognize it. You got to be careful what you wish for when you start complaining about, well, it wasn't so much a complaint, but whining about there are going to be more by-elections.
Yes.
And there will be more people stepping down, and then all of a sudden you're faced with a general election.
Yeah.
You really got to be prepared, because there was talk throughout the community that one might be coming.
Yeah.
And it was a strong talk as well.
Yeah. And the nitty-gritty of it all is the process by which you came to, because it's one thing, as we do now, to support a PLP candidate, but then you came out in an outward way, an obvious way, in a frontline way, to actually canvass this and become a. So tell us about that.
Well, I didn't come out write out and do a newspaper interview or something like that. I didn't think that was important, not given the reason for my supporting Vance Campbell. Not that I'm in any way embarrassed or ashamed about it, I can say that, but I said, I want to do it, one voter at a time way, because that's where it's going to come. What had happened was, and there are a number of levels to this, and I've been working with Vance at the Bermuda Housing Trust since 2000 and I'm going to say 13, quite a while, and I got to know Vance. I knew him before that, only slightly, but I got to know him. And when there was a change in government, Vance decided, he'd been on the Housing Trust, that he was going to stay there and work with me, no problem. He knew my past political affiliation, and we got along well, and we were getting the job done. And I grew to know him and to like him and to respect him and what he brought to the table, and that's public service on top of the job he had and has at SAL as CEO.
Yes.
And we don't really get paid for doing this work. It's public service for nothing.
Yeah.
And you've got to have a commitment. And when the by-election was called in Smith's West, I said, Vance and I had a chat, and I said, I'll tell you what, Vance, I'd be happy to help you canvass if you need any help. Well, he took up the offer, and I said, okay. And then it morphed into a general election.
Yes.
I didn't take the offer back, and he was happy I said, if you're happy to go around with me now, I'd be happy to do it. And the reason I was prepared to do it on another level is there's a personal one.
Yeah.
Secondly, I like what Vance brings to the table, and I think what he will bring to the House of Assembly is what is needed as well, given his background. I mean, his background, as I say, currently now as CEO of SAL, he knows which way is up.
Yes.
And secondly, he works hard as well as president of Young Men's Social Club.
Yes, it's my
He was my old club as well. And I said that I'm happy to do that. But here's the real key, and this is what I told voters. Some of them would think, oh, this is nice. We've got both parties here on my doorstep canvassing. I said, no, I'm here supporting Mr. Campbell. And then invariably the question would be why. If it wasn't asked, I'd tell people why. And I tell them, first of all, how I felt about Mr. Campbell and what he brings to the table. And I said, secondly, look, I'm a person who's been writing and talking for some time, particularly since I've been out of politics. And there's a freedom that comes from being out of being a part of a political party. Where I said, a lot of the stuff that political parties stop you from doing needs to stop.
Okay.
We've got too many people who are friends, in some cases families, who have this divide that occurs because one is one member of the party and another is another member of the party, and they agree on more than they disagree.
Right.
And even where they disagree, they ought to be made to work together to come to a common solution. And there ought to be vehicles to make that happen. And I said, look, I'm out here happy to drop that political partisanship, that divide. If I think he makes a good MP, I'm going to support him. Yes, it means I support his party, but I don't have a problem with that either. Does that mean I agree with everything that PLP has in their platform? Not necessarily, no. Say it was true sometimes of what was in the UBP platform and the MPA platform. And I think people have got to start to be honest about these things. The difficulty is, and I know this from personal experience, when you're a member of a party, when you're an elected member of a party or an appointed member, it is much harder to be that free and open. But that, I think, is what Bermuda is looking for. And not only is Bermuda looking for it, but it needs it, because the divide is not helping us tackle problems which are bigger than us, which are bigger than us and more challenging than even that Bermuda, when it's working together, are going to have a hard time meeting. And so, and I've always spoken, people who served with me in the House on the other side, my friends in the PLP will know that I've always spoken on the need to reform the way in which the House functions to make this not only possible, but standard operating procedure, so that MPs don't just earn their spurs by speaking on the motion to adjourn and making points and getting reported, or tearing a strip off the other side, which is often invariably what it descends to, who can do the best, make the best performance of that. And it's entertaining sometimes, I'll give you that. But after all that's said and done, what are the two actually doing, the two parties, their members, their backbenchers, doing to actually move Bermuda forward in a particular area? And there will be things that the two of them should be doing together. And if you want to spend time on this, I can give you instances of where this is possible.
Actually, what's interesting is you may be wondering what they just asked me to do.
10 minutes.
No. People do call in to ask questions, right? And so the question that someone has written in is, and I guess I'll add to it, is that there's a fine line between, as you've done now, supporting and going out and canvassing and talking to the electorate in terms of why you support now the Honorable Vance Campbell. But what's the next line, or is there any final line in terms of how come you did not, this question is, why did John Barritt not align himself more fully with the PLP? Across the floor, I guess they can say that, but this has happened in the past, this from UEP to PLP and vice versa.
Fair enough, good question. But I think it goes to what I was just saying. And that is that I am enjoying the freedom that I currently have as not being a member of a political party and having to toe the party line. It's good to be, I think, so you can be free and honest about what you feel about a particular issue or person as well.
So sorry, so to clarify, so you're not currently a member of the OBA?
No, have not been since,
Okay.
Not long after I stepped down, after my personal disappointment. And I said, well, if I'm too UDP for them, and that's the way I felt when even some of the people I used to stand shoulder to shoulder with didn't go to bat for me. I said, well, Mother used to always say, don't stay or go where you're not welcome. So,
and just to go back a little bit, because
yes, please, but people understand, that freedom I'm talking about is the freedom that I ended my association with the OBA back 7-8 years ago.
And if you can, if you will, I guess, more recently now, have you felt any sense of being ostracized within your own friends, or like had anybody said, John, forget it, are you no longer being invited, for example? Because of going back to a real reality, which is still that depending upon how you align yourself, you are or are not accepted socially.
I haven't rubbed shoulders or been around a lot of those people who I used to be around in caucuses and party. And so I don't know, and they haven't said a lot of precisely how they feel about what I did. That said, it clear to me, the column I write at the Royal Gazette, that during the election, some of the people who I would describe as operatives for the OBA, and people with, and I always think these are people, one person with different handles,
Yeah.
different names, commenting.
Oh, yeah.
They came after me. It was what I would call more the whispering campaign of trying to damage you personally and your own reputation and to try and bring you down. But, I'm not the first person to endure something like that, and some people have endured even worse because they've been members of the Progressive Labor Party. So I do not expect any sympathy, but to answer your question, absolutely, yes, I'm sure it happened, and I'm sure it's happening. But, none of them have picked up the telephone to say,
Okay.
either to say how they feel or to ask me why I did what I did. But that's cool.
And actually, as a teaser, not for today, but as a teaser, I commented to you, and others have commented similarly, that the face of politicians in Bermuda is changing, literally and figuratively. And as I mentioned to you briefly earlier, it is a fact now that many of Bermuda's white businessmen have exited online politics. What's your comment about that?
I think this is a trend that's been developing over the years. If you look back, the arc has been bending that way. I think there are a couple of reasons for this. One is politics is a lot, I think, dirtier than it used to be in terms of what you have to put up with in terms of, and you know this. It's all like name calling and all of that stuff, and people say it doesn't work. It does require a certain person to get into politics, and it's not an easy path anymore either. It requires some effort, as I'm sure you appreciate, to get in some effort and time, and you've got to be prepared to do that. And some people are not prepared to do that, and I think that's a factor with businessmen and businesswomen in particular these days. And I think the other thing is people are still trying to find what they think is the right and best path for them.
Okay.
And they're waiting for that to develop. And the last election, I think, is an indication of this. And why do I say that? Because there are a number of people who would appear to have been supporters of the OBA who simply didn't support them.
Yes.
We're not certain that that's the best path for Bermuda and for them. And that is very much now out for consideration, and the Progressive Labor Party were the beneficiaries of that. And in some respects, in some of those areas, Smith's West and others that were thought to be solid OBA seats, previously UBP, I think what you're seeing is a welcome trend, and that is people who say, I don't like my vote being taken for granted. That somehow, because historically it voted one way or is one way, it's going to stay that way. People need to buck up and change their game. And game is probably not the right word, but change their approach to politics and the way we're going. And it's something that I think the Progressive Labor Party is going to run into as well. And I make no comment on who's in the Progressive Labor Party, but if you study politics, there's a pendulum that swings. And sometimes you have to be very careful when you're a big majority government that it doesn't redound. Because people will think that confidence is arrogance. Very good, very quickly, very quickly.
And what's good is that this gives us a tease, as I said, for you to come back at a different point in time, because I know that in my victory on number 7, right, there were many persons who voted for the PRP for the first time. And when I was canvassing, I challenged them that if you expect change, you now need to be the change and vote for the PRP for the first time. And since the election, many have come to me to say, well, Anthony, we commended the victory. I think it took more time this time. Look at my actual resume, and obviously based upon my experience and just getting older now, I've done many things, and so they did appreciate that.
And I agree with that. That's why I say I think that's the journey I'm on, being the change that I've often said I wanted to see. Okay, if you can talk the talk, let's see you walk a little of that talk.
Exactly.
And I think I did that with Vance Campbell, but I don't want to overstate it because I want to take nothing away from Vance. That, as I said earlier, that was his 3rd attempt. And it was, when you go around with him to homes and people recognize him and say, yes, Mr. Campbell, I saw you the last time, or I didn't, and he says, well, I left my material and I'm glad I caught you this time. That type of relationship will stand you in good stead when you have to make tough and difficult decisions.
That's correct. And so, Mr. Barrett, our time is up for this session. And we'll say thank you again. And to those in the listening audience, of course, we do this because we want to bring to you information that you have asked about, or that is what we believe to be generally important to yourselves, and we'll continue to do so. We're going to change the schedule. It's not going to be every other week now. We're going to probably go to monthly to ensure that we can sustain it. And again, we encourage you to contact us. My email address is abrichardson@plp.pm, and our permanent phone number is 538-8683. If you forget that, it's 538-VOTE. Please continue to be in contact. We will continue to be in contact with you. And as we approach the Christmas season, we're looking forward to everyone to have an enjoyable time. But again, do contact us with any concerns or comments you have, because I do take seriously now my role to be a representative for everyone that is in constituency number 7. So again, Mr. Barrett, the Honorable John Barrett, we want to say thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I enjoyed it, and I think this sort of thing is the wave of the future, the way to get in contact. But don't let it become a substitute for the personal knock on the door and meeting people at the doorstep. I still think in Bermuda that goes a long, long way.
No question, and that's the hallmark of our factory. You've got a campus. You cannot expect to continue to represent people without canvassing it. For us, canvassing is literally door to door. You got to do that. And
People get to do
every
it.
time.
You build trust.
Exactly.
And that is key.
Again, thank you.
You're very welcome, Anthony. You should probably break the
Okay.
protocol rules here.
It's okay, no problem. You're
All right.
hands.
Does that mean we're off?